Good evening to you from our studios right here in Caracas, Venezuela. My name is Regan Devines. Firstly, beginning with a look at the headlines. Colombia's president lays the terms for a bilateral ceasefire with the FARC guerrillas. Venezuela has been re-elected to the UN's Human Rights Council, which its government declares is a win for regional integration. And the Turkish government storms a media firm. The details on these stories and so much more right now on From the South. Thank you for being here with us. We start tonight in Colombia, where the president, Juan Manuel Santos, announced that a bilateral ceasefire between the FARC guerrillas and the government could be on the table as of the 1st of January, once the two sides can reach an agreement on the fifth area of negotiation in the country's ongoing peace process.
Let's make the effort so that by December the 31st, we can finish the agenda point on the end of the conflict and be able to declare a bilateral, internationally monitored ceasefire from January the 1st.
4 FARC members have been killed and 2 others captured in an operation in the southwestern parts of Colombia. This was announced this Wednesday by the Defense Minister Luis Carlos Villegas. 27-year-old Beatriz Santuria, who was the head of a FARC unit involved in extortion and drug trafficking, died in the operation. The minister added that authorities seized weapons and documents of intelligence value. The government had suspended airstrikes on rebel camps, complying to the peace agreements with the FARC, but not other kinds of offensive military operations. The ELN has taken responsibility for Monday's ambush against a military convoy carrying votes from Sunday's elections in a remote indigenous region. 11 soldiers and 1 police officer were killed in the attack. The ELN released a communique on social media. They have promised to free the 2 soldiers captured in the ambush within the next few days. President Juan Manuel Santos has ordered an intensification in the attacks against the group. And in the Colombian sanctuary of Las Lejas near the Ecuadorian border, victims and murderers from the conflict are received there, looking for consolation and God's forgiveness. One of the priests there thinks that forgiveness, understanding and inclusiveness are key to bringing the end to the conflict in the country.
We can't consider them directly responsible because they have been absorbed by the social conflict. Their crimes are the result of a social disorder that we have experienced for 60, 70, 80 years here in Colombia. This is what we have produced, this is what we have sown, and this is what we are reaping. So any effort to achieve peace and reconciliation would be welcome.
Venezuela has been re-elected to the UN's Human Rights Council, with 131 members of the General Assembly voting in favor of the country having another 3-year term. Also on the council from Latin America will be Ecuador and Panama, alongside other countries such as Germany, the Philippines, Switzerland and Burundi. The council is an intergovernmental body within the United Nations system made up of 47 states responsible for human rights, which are elected on a rotating basis every 3 years. The Venezuelan representative said the election to the council was a victory for integration.
Nuestro país, la República Bolivariana de Venezuela, fue reelecta con una importante votación.
Our country, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, was re-elected with an important vote for a new period in the body of the United Nations. It is a victory that we have achieved, a very important one for our people, for our country. It is a moral and political victory, because we have to defeat the manipulations of the United States against our country and the manipulation of trying to bring down the unity of our region.
De los Estados Unidos contra nuestro país y de las manipulaciones.
Ramirez also said that the overwhelming support for Venezuela shows the support they have globally.
Hemos sacado una votación que demuestra la credibilidad.
We have taken a vote that proves the credibility of our country and the support our country enjoys from other countries of the world. We are nothing more and nothing less than within the General Assembly of the United Nations, and it is a ratification of our diplomacy of peace our diplomacy for the interests of the world's poorest countries and for the benefit of our people.
Nuestra diplomacia de la paz, nuestra diplomacia a favor de los intereses de los países.
Venezuela's defense minister has slammed the United States Southern Command Chief John Kelly for his statements on CNN Espanol that the Venezuelan economy is suffering a moment of implosion and is facing a humanitarian crisis.
El imperio norteamericano, con el subterfugio.
The North American empire, with its subterfuge of the defense of human rights and liberty, is attempting once again to create the necessary conditions to intervene in our country, using as a pretext a possible humanitarian crisis of the supposed economic collapse.
It's been exactly 10 years since the United Nations declared Venezuela free from illiteracy. In just 5 years, the government of Hugo Chavez managed to cut the number of Venezuelans who could not read from 9% to 1%.
In October 2005, UNESCO congratulated the Venezuelan people and their president Hugo Chavez. It said that Venezuela was making an extraordinary contribution to the education of all. Before the Bolivarian Revolution came to power, education in Venezuela had been increasingly neglected. Neoliberal policies had encouraged the privatization of schools and colleges. In 1990, public spending on education stood a little more than 3% of the GDP. By 1996, it had fallen to 2.1%. With the revolution, the situation changed dramatically. The education budget more than doubled to over 7% of the GDP. Under the new constitution, education was made a basic human right, leaving behind the view of schooling as a commodity. UNESCO declared Venezuela to be free from illiteracy. This has been achieved by the adult literacy programs like the Robinson Mission, set up by the revolution with support from Cuba. Currently, the Venezuelan government is concentrating on improving scientific and technological education, an objective laid out as the fifth key target in President Chavez's governmental plan from 2013 to 2019. One example of this priority is the fact that enrollment in higher education in Venezuela has grown dramatically, from just under 900,000 students in the year 2000 to more than 2.6 million in 2014. UNESCO put Venezuela fifth in the world for the numbers attending university as a proportion of the population.
In Brazil, a special commission at the Congress has unanimously approved the proposal for a constitutional amendment addressing demarcation of indigenous lands. Land demarcation currently falls under the authority of the National Indigenous Foundation, the Ministry of Justice, and the Republic's presidency. The PEC 215 transfers the decision to the National Congress, today in the hands of a conservative majority linked to rural owners. It also denies the expansion of already delimited land. The PEC 215 has been in negotiations for 15 years. It now needs to be approved by the Congress and then by the Senate. The president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, enacted a waste management law pushing different levels of government to be more responsible for waste. Morales considers consumerism one of the main factors which leads to environmental contamination. With this new law, he hopes to generate stronger environmental consciousness in the country.
Sirve estas normas, pero yo diría todavía no es ninguna solución.
These laws are very useful. I believe that we have to have a strong debate, a deep debate about the environment of our Mother Earth. Comrades and sisters, especially my sisters from the countryside, remember what were our past experiences. We have forgotten it totally, and for this reason we have fallen into Western culture. The consumerism, at times individualism, egoism.
Por eso digo que caemos a la cultura occidental, en el consumismo, a veces en el individualismo, en personalismo.
In Chile, some 2,000 civil servants stopped work and demonstrated in Santiago in support of a strike at the civil registry that has been in effect for 1 month. The strikers are demanding wage increases, but an agreement has not been reached, resulting in Chileans and foreigners waiting in long lines and often going home empty-handed. 1 million people are awaiting proceedings, and civil registry officials agreed to work on Tuesdays to try and ease the situation. And a beautiful sight in the driest place in the world. Chile's Atacama Desert is flowering for the first time in 12 years, following massive downpours earlier in the year linked to this year's Godzilla El Niño. The floral phenomenon, where dormant seeds bloom in spring after high rainfall events, is known as Desierto Florido, or flowering desert. And coming up after the break, Syrian government officials claim that Saudi planes are taking Islamic State terrorists out of Syria into Yemen to fight. A report on this and much more next.
Wherever the news, you'll be there.
Rod stars G1 and Claudia de la Cruz are Rebel Diaz, hip-hop activists positioned within a history of political resistance through music. And You Don't Stop. They invite young people to express themselves about their social struggles. And You Don't Stop. Watch it on telesurtv.net/English. Telesur, wherever the news, you'll be there. Caracas, Havana, Mexico, Quito, Washington. Wherever the newsmakers will be there. Watch it on telesurtv.net/English. Telesur, wherever the news, you'll be there.
Days ahead of the country's parliamentary elections, Turkish police stormed the offices of an opposition media firm owned by Kuzey Pek in a crackdown on media linked to a US-based critic. In Istanbul, brawls broke out and police used water cannons to disperse dozens of people in front of the offices of Kanal Turk and Bugün TV, who took to the streets in protest. On Tuesday, authorities also took over management of 22 companies owned by IPEC. The media outlets have been critical of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, accusing him of growing authoritarianism ahead of the parliamentary elections on November 1st. Rights group Amnesty International has released a report stating that Israeli police have carried out a series of unlawful killings of Palestinians using intentional and unjustified lethal force. The organization added that they are concerned that Israeli forces are using lethal force instead of trying to arrest anyone suspected of planning to do something against the Israeli forces. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu refuted the report, saying that his forces do not use excessive force. Palestine's President Mahmoud Abbas asked for protection against the Palestinian people this Wednesday before the UN Human Rights Council, where he renewed calls for a two-state solution. Abbas remarked that the human rights situation under Israeli occupation is at its worst ever, as violence has flared in the recent weeks.
We also welcome international, European, and Arab efforts which call for expanding international participation to achieve peace, including a Security Council resolution that includes clear standards for achieving peace on the basis of the two-state solution along the 1967 lines, and to set a timeline to end the occupation under international supervision and to launch that in an international peace conference.
Are sunglasses and headscarves now killing tools for the Israeli occupation forces against Palestinians? Here is Telezur's Noor Harzin.
A state of panic has haunted the Israeli community and raised their suspicions against every Arab after a series of knife and run-over attacks by Palestinians have echoed in East Jerusalem and the West Bank since the beginning of October. This status has dominated to the extent that made Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly argue his people to hold up arms to supposedly defend themselves against the Palestinian attacks. In this way, the Palestinians have become easy targets to be caught up in mobs or get shot by Israeli fire for doing nothing.
It is the resistance of a new generation of young men and women. This resistance will affect the herds of settlers and the Israeli occupation soldiers and forces. This resistance has created a status of horror among the occupiers. It is capable of frightening the Israeli occupation. So we should work to have this popular uprising continue until it develops to a third intifada. We should prevent it from quelling and failing because it has actually paved the way toward attaining our national legitimate rights.
In the most grim example, 2 weeks ago, an 18-year-old Palestinian girl, Hadil al-Hashmaloun, was shot dead by Israeli fire in the West Bank city of Hebron after she refused to take off her headscarf when she was ordered to do so at an Israeli checkpoint. The story of Isra Abed portrays another tragedy. Isra, 29, was killed by Israeli fire in cold blood on suspicion that she was holding a knife. However, a video that was shown on the social media after her death showed her laying dead when an Israeli soldier was moving her sunglasses from beside her and not a knife. Meanwhile, Palestinian official websites have accused Israel of fabricating the stabbing attacks and planting knives at the crime scenes after killing innocent Palestinians. Nur Harazin, Telesu TV, Gaza.
Winter is on the way. That's the concern of many Pakistani and Afghan families who are still homeless after Monday's 7.5 magnitude earthquake. Parents and their children are sleeping in the cold at present, while authorities still grapple with aiding those in hard-to-reach mountainous areas. The government has vowed to assist those in need as soon as possible. The earthquake was responsible for the deaths of over 380 people. There is some more video here released by the Russian military, which claim to show more strikes in Syria's Idlib, Homs, Hama, Aleppo, Latakia and Damascus provinces. The country's defense ministry says it's flown 71 sorties over Syria in the past 2 days, carrying out 118 strikes on militant targets. German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier has welcomed this Wednesday's announcement that Iran will attend Syria talks in Vienna on Friday. He added that the solution relies on the US and Russia not opposing each other, and in order to get that, other countries are necessary in the talks.
There appears to be enough momentum now that there is reasonable hope that for the first time there will be a meeting in Vienna on Friday, where not only Russia, the United States, and Europe will be represented, but also Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. At least, this is not yet a breakthrough, and this is not yet the political situation, but it's the first necessary step.
And staying in Syria, some Islamic State terrorists are being pushed out of Syria and, according to the government, being taken by Saudi Arabia to Yemen. Hazam Abdullah has the report.
With Russian air support, the Syrian army has repelled a violent attack on the town of Ceasefire, southeast of Aleppo. The Islamic State group are trying to control the town to prevent the army from lifting the siege on the Queris airport nearby.
The United States and its supporters in the region are mainly against Syria, and they are trying with all their strength to foil any progress of the Syrian army. This is what Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey are trying to do by supporting the terrorists here. But we will win, inevitably, and with great thanks to our friends, the Russians.
At the same time, a Syrian military spokesman said that intelligence reports show that on the 16th of October, 4 aircraft arrived to Aden airport in Yemen, coming from Turkey, carrying more than 500 Daesh terrorists who had withdrawn from Syria because of Russian airstrikes.
The 500 terrorists withdrew from Syria because of Russian airstrikes, and when they arrived in Aden, officers of the Saudi alliance distributed them among 3 groups of terrorists. They moved the first group to the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, and the second group to Marib in Yemen, and the third group to Jazan and Asir on the Saudi-Yemeni border, to join the coalition ground forces. And the information we have is that the transfer of ISIS terrorists from Syria will continue during the coming period.
The progress of the Syrian army, supported by the Russian air campaign, has confounded the extremists and the West, forcing both to change their plans for attacks and to withdraw from the areas they had previously controlled. Hazem Abdullah, Telesur, Syria.
Germany is a main destination for refugees and migrants because of its strong economy. However, authorities say they are now trying to cope with the vast numbers arriving there. Germany's mayor of the border town of Passau is suggesting that Munich needs to be reopened as an entry point to assist with the influx. The government has also been focusing on assisting refugees of war-torn countries, as well as deporting anyone arriving solely for economic reasons. Pro- and anti-refugee groups faced off in central Prague. About 1,000 anti-migrant protesters demanded an end to recently introduced EU policies on refugees. The far-right group carried placards that read, "Merkel plus Islam equals Third World War." They also chanted anti-refugee slogans including "Czech Republic for the Czechs." Lawmakers of the European Union have turned down draft legislation that seeks to allow countries to ban certain genetically modified foods and animal feed. The European Parliament rejected the draft with a vote of 577 to 75. European Parliament Government Committee Chair Giovanni La Via said that the vote was representative of the proposal's failure to provide an impact assessment. Lawmakers believe that the proposal could reintroduce border controls for foodstuff and feedstuff, creating chaos for consumers and farmers. Britain's Prime Minister David Cameron is urging parliamentarians to not vote in favour of the country's departure from the European Union. Cameron has been actively trying to renegotiate Britain's membership with the bloc, saying that things needed to change within the EU. He drew reference to Norway, which some have held up as an example of a country's successful departure from the EU. However, Cameron said Norway's model could not be emulated, as they currently have no seat on the EU and no bargaining power, yet still contribute hundreds of millions of euros to the EU budget. The United States oil industry views fracking as an opportunity for economic growth. However, the large amounts of contamination and the serious health issues that this practice causes are completely ignored by U.S. officials. Bianca Perez is there. She filed this report.
That was putting a 16-inch pipeline in the ground.
Craig Stevens lives on the land that his family has owned for almost 200 years, since 2010. In 2011, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, conducted an investigation because of complaints of contamination in the water due to fracking in the area, but the results were not what Craig expected.
It was a presidential election year in 2012. Those investigations started in 2011. They went on for almost 2 years before we were completely abandoned because they were finding so many problems that there was no way politically anybody could survive that.
Tired of being ignored, Craig, along with organizations that defend the environment and other people also affected by fracking, denounced in Washington, D.C. the situation at their lands. At the same time, only a few feet away, an EPA report was presented, which according to Stevens excluded contamination results found on their lands.
There might be 10% of the water contamination cases represented here. Of 90% are not even in this document, and they're reviewing water contamination. So that's my prop for today going to speak. That is their study that they're evaluating in there.
Studies show that at least 15.3 million Americans live within a mile of a well that has been drilled since the year 2000. This close proximity to the contamination has led to thousands of citizens manifesting serious health issues.
The health impacts have been myriad. People lose their hair, they have horrible rashes, terrible headaches, tumors, all sorts of really serious diseases that aren't being explored.
Statistics from the beginning of 2015 show that 22 out of the 50 states in the U.S. currently practice fracking. Bianca Perez, Telesur, Washington, D.C.
And now a brief look at other stories making news around the world.
Communist lawmaker Bidya Bandari has been elected as Nepal's first female president in a parliamentary vote. She replaces Ram Baram Yadav, who has been president since 2008 following the abolition of a 240-year-old Hindu monarchy. Bandari said that she would do her best to protect the constitution and work for the country's development and prosperity. Zanzibar has proclaimed its recent elections null and void after the country's electoral commission cited massive infringements in the voting process, including double voting and cheating. Opposition parties have also alleged rigging in Sunday's presidential, general and local elections. Rajendra Nikauji, the gangster apprehended this week by Indonesian police, will be extradited to India where he will face charges of the murders of over a dozen people. Also known as Chota Rajan or Little Rajan, he had been on the run for 20 years before he was finally caught at Ngurah Rai International Airport in Bali. And the fate of 3 crew members of a Spanish Air Force helicopter is unknown. The plane had just crashed in the Atlantic off the coast of the Western Sahara after taking technical stop in Mauritania. Spanish authorities are working with the Moroccan patrol vessels to find the helicopter.
A Filipino designer has been collecting trash in and around his neighborhood and transforming it all into gowns and costumes. His name is John Paul Halili, but he goes by the name Ricia Juan Paulo, and he once lived on the streets of Manila as a homeless person. Now, however, the 35-year-old is an events planner at a catering services company and makes costumes as a hobby. He has no formal training in drawing, sewing or pattern making, but he says that he relies on instinct when creating his designs. He also hopes that he can inspire others to recycle. Now, you can enter the Guinness World Book of Records for anything really, and this story is proof of that. 525 people in China have set the record for the largest number of pizzas tossed at the same time. They simultaneously tossed 511 pizzas at a hotel in Shanghai, 511 out of 525. Well, not all of them were able to contribute to the record according to the rules. Now, this did not take place without a cause, as most of the tossers were breast cancer patients, hence the pink t-shirts, the official color representing the fight against breast cancer. The participants used the opportunity to raise awareness of the disease. And finally this evening, we have an excerpt from our very own Cultura Latina program hosted by Mauricio Izquierdo. This episode takes a look at how Chinese culture has been integrated in Peru through food and family values. Here's a preview.
This week in Cultura Latina, Chinese culture has a strong presence in Peru thanks to the success that Chinese immigrants and their descendants, known as Tusanes, have enjoyed in integrating into Peruvian society while maintaining their cultural heritage and identity. The Peruvian Chinese Association estimates there are 5 million Peruvians with Chinese last names living. Cultural similarities also bring Chinese and Peruvians together, for instance, the importance of close family ties. The fact that Peruvians are known for having a culinary culture makes Chinese officials believe that the first medium for integration of Chinese immigrants was sharing their cooking. All of this and more this week in Cultura Latina.
And you can actually see this episode of Cultura Latina. It can be seen on our website this Friday. You can also check out other stories at our website at telesurtv.net/English. From our newsrooms in Quito, Ecuador, and right here in Caracas, Venezuela, I'm Regan Veens. Have a great evening. We'll see you tomorrow.